The voice came from the hallway, hushed but sharp enough to cut through the wall. I wasn't meant to hear it. That much was clear, but I did. She's the reason no one comes around anymore. You know it. I know it. I had paused halfway through folding. The clean towels just stood there, holding the edge of one like it might keep me upright. They didn't know I was in the guest room. They thought I'd already gone to bed. A laugh followed. It was quiet, tired, a little bitter. I think it was my daughter-in-law, or maybe my own daughter. Strange how voices start to blend when they carry the same weight. That quiet disappointment, that subtle edge of blame wrapped in civility. I couldn't tell any more. They think I'm the echo in the house that never stops, the reminder. One who lingers too long at dinner says the wrong thing at the wrong time. They didn't say it outright. They never do. That would make them look cruel. No, they're kind people. Generous, too. That's what the neighbors say. That's what I believed for a long time. When my grandson brushed past me in the kitchen that morning and didn't look up, I told myself he was tired. Exams, maybe. His shoulders had started to hunch the way my son's did when he was a teenager. I used to rub circles on his back when he had headaches. He doesn't remember that now. The next morning, the cereal box was moved to the highest shelf. My mug was in the wrong cupboard. My slippers gone. The little things. The ones no one ever admits to. That night, I stood at the edge of the dining room, watching them talk about a cruise in August. They didn't ask if I wanted to go. They didn't look in my direction. I cleared the plates anyway, like I used to. I bet, maybe. Or hope. Later, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan that squeaked every third turn. The moonlight spilled across the wall, and I listened. Not to voices this time, but to the silence that stretched between them. The way no one knocked to say, "Good night." It's the way I didn't belong even in the house I helped them buy. I turned to the side and looked at my packed bag. It had been ready for 2 days. It's just sitting there. I'd put it together when I first noticed the car keys were missing from the hook. And no one told me they moved them. I'd smiled through Mother's Day lunch. Worn the little brooch they gave me 4 years ago. Still kept it in its plastic box when no one was looking. I'd told my son he looked tired and he didn't answer. Ha! He blinked slowly and kept buttering his bread. I knew that look. I used to wear it when his father did the same thing to me. I waited until the house was quiet, until even the cat stopped meowing at the window. Then I got up, put on my shoes, the comfortable ones with the worn heel, and wrote a note. Nothing dramatic, just a few lines. I didn't sign it with love, didn't sign it at all. I placed the note in the fruit bowl. They never touched the fruit. It would be days before they saw it. Then I stepped outside, closed the door behind me like I'd done 1,000 times before. Only this time I didn't take a key. The street was empty. A single porch light flickered across the road. I stood there for a while, breathing. It was early, but the air was warm, soft, like it wasn't trying to hold me back. I walked 4 blocks to the bus stop, sat down on the cold bench and waited. Not for the bus that came later. I waited for the fear to show up, but it didn't. Not really. There was a kind of grief, yes. But even that felt like something I'd already made peace with. As the bus pulled up, I saw my reflection in the window. Not young, not weak either. Just a woman with a bag and a note left behind. No one yelled after me, no footsteps chasing me. Down. Not even the sound of a door opening, so I got on and I didn't look back. I wasn't always the woman who left quietly in the night. Once, I was the one people came to. For birthdays, for advice, for money, though they never said it that plainly. I made a life out of tending to others. Packing school lunches with handwritten notes, stitching hems and wiping noses, memorizing favorite meals. I thought that's what love was, showing up over and over, no matter how invisible you felt doing it. I raised 2 children, a boy and a girl. They were loud, lovely things once. My daughter had curls that nodded by noon and a laugh that made strangers smile. My son, quieter, thoughtful, He used to lay his head on my lap during thunderstorms, saying the rain made him nervous. I would rub his temples until he fell asleep. Their father left before our daughter turned 8. He wasn't cruel, just absent. A silence shaped like a man. I filled the gaps. I worked part-time cleaning houses, sewing for the church ladies. Anything that kept the lights on. I didn't complain. Not out loud sometimes. I imagined being noticed for it. For surviving. For never letting them feel how close we were to the edge. But no one awards you for endurance. They just expect more of it. As they got older, they became strangers I still loved. My daughter married young, moved states away. She sent postcards for the first 2 years. I kept them all tucked in the drawer with old receipts and a broken brooch I never got around to fixing. Her handwriting changed over time, softer, then smaller. Then gone. My son stayed close. Married a woman who didn't like sweets or small talk. She always called me by my first name. Never Mom, not even once. I didn't mind at first. Thought maybe it was a boundary thing. Oh, but even boundaries can be held kindly. They had a son, my grandson, and I loved him with a kind of fierceness I didn't expect. Held him the way I had held his father, afraid to blink in case I missed something. I offered to babysit to help with the late nights, the colic, the teething, but they said they had it handled. I crocheted a blanket anyway, left it on there. Doorstep one morning, never saw it again. Years passed like seasons you stop naming. Lived nearby, close enough to help, far enough to be forgotten. I was the emergency contact on their forms, the one who showed up when daycare called, when the car wouldn't start, when flu swept through the house and left them pale and exhausted. I didn't ask for thanks, just a place to belong, but slowly. They stopped offering even that. The holidays shifted first. At first it was small, they forgot to mention the new dinner time, or they'd invite me only the night before. Then came the excuse years. Oh, we're traveling this time. It's just us and the little one. You understand, right? I smiled and said, of course. I always said of course. My boundaries were made of soft paper, soaked and bending. I started spending. Christmas mornings, walking the quiet streets. Sometimes I'd leave a little gift at their door. A card, a baked pie. They never mentioned receiving them. Still, I showed up. For school plays, for birthdays. I stood in the back with my hands clasped, clapping when it was time, smiling even when no one turned to meet my eyes. It was easy to pretend. For a while that I was still needed. That I was simply in the background because they were busy. 'Cause that's what adulthood is. Everyone's spinning in their own little orbits, forgetting the gravity that once held them close. But that's not what it was. Not really. The truth came slow, like water rising in a locked room. First, in the way they rolled their eyes when I repeated stories. Then, in the sighs when I asked too many questions. And finally, in the stillness that followed when I stopped asking at all. One day I arrived with groceries they hadn't asked for. Little things I knew. They used almond milk, the cereal my grandson liked, the tea she preferred when she had headaches. My son took the bag from my hands and said, "We don't really need this, Mom. You don't have to keep doing this," I said. I knew, and I did it anyway. That was the thing I never needed to be needed. I just didn't want to be erased. But erasure doesn't come with fanfare. It happens in silences. In the chair that's no longer pulled out for you. In the way your name disappears from group chats. In how people smile at you out of politeness, not affection. I stayed longer than I should have. I stayed because I believed they'd remember. That love, once given so freely, must echo somewhere. I was wrong. What hurt most wasn't that they stopped loving me. It was realizing they may never have known how. And once that truth settled in, there was nothing left to wait for, not even a goodbye. The betrayal didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to name, easier to walk away from. It came like weather, gradual, familiar, and then, one day, unbearable. It started with the conversations I wasn't included in. The glances exchanged across the room when I spoke. The decisions made without my voice. I told myself I was being sensitive, that getting older meant learning how to step back, let the younger ones lead. I reminded myself over and over that it wasn't personal, but it was. The day I found the document, it was unintentional. I wasn't snooping. I was searching for a charger in the side drawer of the living room cabinet, the one I'd bought with my own money years ago, back when the house was still new and full of hope. I found a stack of papers instead. Loose sheets, some folded, some still sharp-edged from the printer. At first, I didn't understand what I was reading. Were names, legal language. Phrases like transfer of ownership and cohabitation agreement and financial liability. And then I saw it. My name crossed out, replaced by hers. No initials, no explanation. Just gone. The house was in their names now. Fully, no shared clauses, no safety net for me. I'd once held a small percentage my son had insisted on. That when we signed the original agreement, he said it was to honor what I contributed. The loan I took, the equity I gave up from my own small flat. Said I'd always have security, a place of my own. But now I was no longer there. Not legally, not on paper. Not in spirit. I stood still for a long time, holding that paper like it could set fire to my hands. I read every line twice, 3 times, looking for a mistake, for an old date, for something. To explain it away, but it was recent, dated only a month ago. And signed, both of them, no one had told me. Not even in passing. Not even in some clipped, awkward conversation that left me swallowing my pride in silence. Nothing. I heard them, laughing in the kitchen while I stood in the hallway with the truth. I didn't say anything. Not that day, not the next. I smiled when she asked if I'd seen the missing charger. Said no. Poured myself tea and went upstairs. I didn't touch the mug. That night, I opened my notebook. It's the one I kept in my purse. The one no one ever noticed. I wrote down everything, the date, the document title, the exact wording from the section that removed me. I underlined the signature dates. I didn't know why I was writing it all down. Maybe to prove to myself later that I hadn't imagined it. That notebook became my mirror. My sanity. I began writing in it every day. Not poetry, not bitterness. Just facts, small things, conversations, glances, the name my daughter-in-law used when she spoke about me in third person, as if I wasn't in the room. I saw her text messages once. She had left her phone on the kitchen island. It buzzed, a name I didn't know, and then a message preview. She's still here. Acts like we owe her something. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I just walked away and stood in the garden until it got cold. I began noticing how careful they were about keeping certain things out of my reach. Passwords changed, mail redirected. The bank statements I once helped organize, gone. They said it was all going paperless. More efficient that way. But I knew I wasn't meant to see anything anymore. I wasn't part of the system. Even my grandson had started to pull back. He used to sit beside me on the couch, his head leaning on my arm. Used to ask me to read to him, even though he could read faster than I could. Lately, he'd just nod when I spoke, or walk past me as if my voice didn't land. I found a school photo of him, the new one, the one I hadn't seen, folded behind a stack of bills on the side table. I looked at it for a long time. He was taller now, wearing the same crooked smile his father once had. And I realized something that hollowed me out. I didn't know what he wanted for his birthday. I didn't know his favorite color anymore. I was fading. Not just from the paperwork, from memory. From presence. One evening I heard my daughter-in-law whisper through the bathroom door. She doesn't pull her weight. She sits around like this. Is some kind of reward. It's draining. I'm tired of pretending. My son didn't reply right away. I listened through the silence. It's that stretch of space where love is supposed to show up. Then he sighed and said, I know, we'll figure something out. That was the moment it clicked. They weren't just tired. They were planning. They were deciding how to remove me gently, quietly, legally. needed, they had already started, and I was still setting the table, still folding laundry, still making tea. I went back to my room that night and looked in the mirror. My face was soft and strange. My eyes looked older than they should have. There was a tightness around my mouth I hadn't noticed before. I sat on the edge of the bed and reached for the notebook, wrote one sentence across the page. They have already erased me. All that's left is the leaving. I didn't cry that night. I sat with the notebook open on my lap, pen resting in the fold, eyes tracing over the words I had just written. They have already erased me. All that's left is the leaving. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't brave. It was just the truth, finally laid bare. And for once I didn't look away from it. The next morning I woke up before the house stirred. I stood by the window and watched the neighbor's porch light blink against the fog. The street was still. A bird landed on the edge of the fence and stayed there, unmoving. I thought of all the mornings I had stood in that exact spot, coffee in hand, watching the world wake up and wondering if anyone noticed that I had already been awake for hours. I made myself a cup of tea, sat in silence while it steeped. No radio, no footsteps, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the creak of the cabinet when I opened it. I left the mug untouched on the table, steam curling like breath in the cold air. By the time they came down, her in her slippers, him half scrolling through his phone, I had already packed half my things. Quietly, no drawers slammed, no zippers dragged loud across the carpet. I knew which suitcase wouldn't squeak when rolled. I smiled when she said, "Morning," flat and empty. He didn't look up. I nodded. That was it. The last words we exchanged in that house. I think I already knew I wouldn't speak to them again. I spent the day watching for signs, not from them. I was done with that. I watched myself. Watched how I moved through the house like a visitor, not a mother. How I measured my steps, kept my breath low. Like I didn't want to disturb the shape of things, and I began to write more than facts. I wrote what I'd given, not to be pitied, but to remember. My hands had baked every birthday cake until she insisted on store-bought. My feet had stood in grocery lines, last in the queue, calculating prices down to the coin. My heart had stayed open long after it should have shut its doors. I wrote it all. Then I wrote what I had left, one pension account, 2 suitcases, a silver locket with no photo inside, a battered address book with crossed-out names and 3 numbers that still worked, my voice, my silence. That evening, I walked to the park nearby. I watched children play, couples pass, a teenager kiss her boyfriend's cheek in the golden light. I sat on the cold bench and didn't feel bitter, just awake, just alive again somehow. When I returned, the lights were off in the living room. A dish sat in the sink, something I would have washed without being asked once. Let it stay. I opened my laptop and searched for something I hadn't allowed myself to look up in years. Long-term stays, motels, rooms with locks and no shared walls. Places where no one asked where you were from, only when you'd be checking out. I found one, small faded curtains, a name I couldn't pronounce. I booked 3 nights. No questions. I cleared my browser history. The next morning, I went through the kitchen drawers and retrieved my documents. Birth certificate, passport, bank slips. I wrapped them in a scarf and tucked them in the lining of my old purse. I knew they wouldn't notice anything missing. They never asked about what belonged to me. I made copies of my ID, my bank details, hid them in my journal. I called the post office, requested a mail hold. No forwarding address, just stop delivery. The woman on the line asked if it was temporary. I said, I don't know yet. She said, okay. I withdrew money from my account. Not everything, just enough. It's just what I had put in myself. I went to the attic and pulled out the boxes I'd kept from before I moved in. I found the photo of my mother, her eyes tired but her spine straight. A woman who never asked to be thanked for surviving. I put the photo in my bag. That night I sat with my notebook and wrote a letter. Not to them. To myself. It read, "You were never the problem. You gave. You stayed, you broke in quiet ways, and still you stood. Now you go, not in anger, but in clarity. Let this be the last time you abandon yourself for the comfort of others. I folded the letter, placed it in the envelope, and left it in the fruit bowl. They wouldn't see it right away, maybe not for days, but they would. And when they did, it would be too late. I didn't want their apology. I only wanted to stop waiting for it. At dawn, I took one last look at the hallway mirror. My reflection wasn't proud. Just steady, tired maybe, but not broken. I brushed a loose hair from my cheek and picked up my bag. I didn't slam the door. I closed it with the same hands that had once tucked them into bed. No drama, no noise, only freedom. And silence that finally belonged to me. The motel room was small, but it didn't judge me. It had 2 beds with mismatched sheets, a nightstand between them, and a television mounted crookedly on the wall. The curtains smelled faintly of smoke, and old detergent. The air conditioner hummed with a tired rhythm, but it worked. That was enough. I set my bag on the bed nearest the window and sat down slowly, letting the silence press into me. No one asking where I was going, no eyes rolling at my questions, no voice behind a door saying she's still here, just stillness. I took off my shoes and looked around. There was no welcome basket, no handwritten note, no framed photo of a smiling family above the headboard. That comforted me more than I expected. I unpacked only the essentials: toothbrush, nightgown, the scarf-wrapped bundle of documents I'd protected like breath. My notebook. I placed the notebook beside the bed. Reached for the remote. Didn't turn the TV on. Instead, I lay down, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. The texture of it reminded me of the hospital where I'd once stayed after a fainting spell. They had thought it was a stroke. It wasn't. Just exhaustion. I remember the nurse saying, "She needs rest. Real rest. Not the kind where you're still listening for footsteps in the hall now." I understood what she meant. I didn't sleep much that night, but it was different. I didn't stay awake fearing what I'd overhear or worrying whether I'd said the wrong thing at dinner. I wasn't waiting for the sound of voices behind my back. I just lay there, free. The next morning, I walked down the street and bought myself a plain bagel and a small coffee. No one spoke to me. The cashier said nothing but the total. It felt like mercy. I sat on a bench outside the gas station and watched people move past. I imagined their stories, where they were going, who they were waiting on, what they carried in their hearts. Not once did I imagine they were thinking about me, and that felt like relief. I opened my notebook and drew a line down the center of the page. On one side, I wrote what I had walked away from. On the other, what I still held, walked away from. The house there silenced my grandson's eyes, not meeting mine, being tolerated. Not loved, waiting, still held. My name, my hands, my mind, a pension, a body that still moved when I told it to my piece after. Breakfast, I found a small library tucked between a laundromat and a pharmacy. Smelled like old bindings and tired plastic chairs. I got a visitor's pass and sat at a corner table flipping through books I didn't plan to borrow. I spent 2 hours reading in silence. Not about betrayal, not about healing. Just fiction. Stories that had nothing to do with me. I felt invisible, in the best way. Later that day, I called the bank and removed the secondary contact from my account. They asked if I was sure. I said I was. I didn't explain. I signed into my email and created a new one. Simple. Just my first name and the year I was born. I deleted the old account without looking back. That email had carried years of messages I had never replied to. Invitations I had never received. Receipts of things I never asked to pay for. Gone. I changed the password to my pension portal. Locked it down tight. Reset my phone to factory settings. And only reinstalled what I needed. A map app. A notes app. Simple weather widget. My life shrank to fit in a purse. And for the first time, it felt like it truly belonged to me. I didn't tell anyone where I was, not even my daughter. She hadn't called in months, only texted once last winter asking for a copy of her birth certificate. I sent it, and she replied with a thumbs up. That was our last exchange now. The only people who knew where I slept were the motel clerk and the night security. Man who nodded at me each evening as if I were something solid. Something seen. On the third day, I paid. For a full week in advance. The clerk raised his eyebrows but said nothing. I nodded once and passed him the cash. I wasn't planning to stay forever. Just long enough to let the static clear. Each evening, I wrote in the notebook. Not memories, not wounds. Just observations. The way the woman in room 8 smoked one. Cigarette exactly at 9:15. The stray dog who trotted across the parking lot like he owned the place. It's the way the wind sounded different without trees nearby. I was building something quietly, brick by brick. A version of myself that didn't require explaining. The only call I made was to the lawyer whose card I had kept in the back of my old wallet. He had helped me once, years ago, with a lease dispute. He remembered me. I need to revise a few things, I said. My will. My emergency contact. Power of attorney. He asked for an address. I gave him the motel's P.O. box. He didn't ask questions. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in years. Control, not loud. Not loud. Just mine. I sat by the window that night, watching the neon vacancy sign flicker across the dark lot. A part of me wondered if they had found the letter yet. They were reading it now, confused, maybe concerned. But I didn't dwell there. Whatever they felt, if they felt anything, was no longer my business. I had done the thing they never expected me to do. I had stopped asking to be kept and started learning how to keep myself. They didn't notice. Right away. That much I'm sure of. The letter sat in the fruit bowl for at least 2 days. I imagine it blended in with the bananas, tucked under coupons and unopened junk mail. They weren't used to looking for me, not even in writing, but eventually one of them must have seen the envelope. I hadn't sealed it. I wanted them to open it without effort. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted a silence. They would. Have to sit in? I didn't sign it with love. I didn't sign it at all. Just the truth. 4 sentences. Enough to shift the floor beneath their feet. I'm not missing. I'm no longer where you left me. Do not look for me. This time, I left before you could decide how. I turned my phone on that evening for the first time since leaving. Not because I wanted to be found, I just wanted to witness the unraveling. Quietly, from a distance. 17 missed calls, mostly from my son, a few from her, 3 from unknown numbers. I didn't call back. I didn't even listen to the voicemails. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote down the time of each call. 9:03 a.m., 9:05, 9:07. The panic had built quickly. Good later that night, the voicemails started transcribing themselves. I didn't press play. Only read the fragments. Mom, this isn't funny. We just want to talk. Where did you go? You left without saying anything. Just call me back, please. Please. There was no apology. No acknowledgement, only concern for their discomfort. I had shifted their order and now they were spinning. The next day I checked her social media. Not my son's, he rarely posted. But she lived in that curated space of digital performance. Her page was quiet, no photos, just a caption that said, "Some people will ruin everything and still think they're the victim." I almost laughed, almost instead. I muted her account too. Days later, a post from my daughter appeared. A picture of an empty chair at the dining table. She left without a word. No goodbye, no explanation. Some people just disappear when they can't control the narrative. Narrative, that word sat in my throat like gravel. They had written me into their version of the story, the difficult one. It's the one who clung too long. It's the shadow that made the house feel heavy. Now that I had left, they didn't know how to rewrite me. So they made me a villain, a ghost who abandoned them. A mother who walked away from love. But love had walked away from me long before I packed my bag. A few days later, I received an email. Not from them, from the school. My grandson's teacher. A kind woman who had once invited me to a school art fair. She said she was reaching out because my name had been listed as emergency contact and she'd been told I was no longer reachable. She wanted to confirm. I replied simply, that contact is no longer valid. Please remove it from your files. No signature, no explanation. It's closure. I could imagine the phone calls behind the scenes. It's the half-truths. They must have told the school, the friends, the neighbors. I wasn't there to contradict them. Must have driven them mad. I didn't check the voicemails anymore. I stopped counting the missed calls. Let the panic run its course. One night I received a long message from my daughter. It was almost midnight. Her words were tight, clipped. Rehearsed? I don't know what you're doing, but you're hurting people who tried to help you. We let you stay. We tried to make space for you, and this is how you repay us. By vanishing. I read the message once, twice, then deleted it. I didn't reply. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. Moved beyond wanting anything from them, even understanding. Their words were a mirror of their own guilt, and I had no space left to hold it for them. In the mornings, I walked to the same bench near the gas station, sipped coffee slowly, watched the sky change. Sometimes I brought the notebook with me, wrote letters I never planned to send. One to my grandson, telling him about the time I held him for 3 hours straight when he had colic. How his head fit perfectly under my chin. How I hummed the same lullaby until he finally slept. One to my younger self, apologizing for all the years I confused being needed with being loved. And one to the silence, thanking it for teaching me how to stay still without waiting. By the end of the week, the calls slowed. The messages thinned. Panic gave way to something else. Frustration, maybe. Resentment. They were realizing what I had taken with me. When I left. Not just the woman who did the dishes. Not just the babysitter, the unpaid helper. It's the quiet fixture in the corner. I had taken the last witness of their goodness. And now, all they had was each other. The motel clerk asked if I wanted to extend my stay. Said no. I'd found a small flat a few blocks away. A sublet with peeling wallpaper and a window that faced a brick wall. It was perfect. The day I left the motel, left no forwarding address. Just cash in an envelope and a short note to the cleaner. Thank you for not asking questions. Sometimes I still turned the phone on, just to see, just to confirm. But most days I didn't. I was building something now, and I didn't need them to see it, to know it was real. The flat was small and honest. It smelled faintly of old books and dust, the kind that clung to walls that had seen too many winters. The wallpaper peeled at the corners like it had grown tired of pretending. The radiator clicked every now and then, and the window faced a red brick wall that caught the afternoon sun in a way. That made everything inside look gold for about 10 minutes a day. I liked that window more than any view I'd had in years. I furnished the flat with the quiet rhythm of someone finally listening to herself. A single bed. A table with 2 chairs, though I only needed one. A kettle. A chipped blue mug from a second hand shop that said today is yours. The kind of thing people buy ironically, but I didn't. I liked the way it felt in my hands. Solid. Slightly heavier than it looked. Like me. I bought a soft throw blanket in a color I didn't have to justify to anyone. Olive green. The woman at the shop said it brought out the silver in my hair. I smiled. I hadn't noticed anyone speaking to me that gently in a long time. On the 3rd morning, I walked into the corner bakery and asked if they had any rolls left. The girl behind the counter said just one, warm still, if I didn't mind it being a bit misshapen. I said I didn't mind. She handed it to me in a napkin and told me my cardigan looked comforting. That's the word she used. Comforting no one. had called me that in years. I started coming by each morning. She began to expect me. After a week, she stopped asking my name and just called me Miss Mornings. It made me laugh. I didn't correct her. Every day I walked past the park and watched the same man feed the pigeons. He wore a wool hat no matter the weather and whistled something tuneless while crumbling bread in his hands. I never approached him. But one afternoon, as I passed, he nodded and said, "You're the quiet type, aren't you?" I said yes. He smiled like that was the best kind. Sometimes I sat in the park and just listened. Not for what people said, but for how the world sounded without expectation. Leaves brushing sidewalks, distant conversations. Dogs barking. Laughter that wasn't mine but somehow made room for me anyway. I read library books and didn't rush. Through them I took the long way home even when it rained. I found a laundromat with machines that rattled like they were telling secrets, and I didn't mind the wait. No one rushed me. No one sighed loudly behind me in line. I folded my clothes slowly, the way I used to fold theirs. Only now it was for me. One evening, I found a small community notice tacked to the door of the market. Local seniors gathering, storytelling, and tea. No experience needed. It's just show. I tore off the tab and slipped it into my coat pocket. I didn't go that week, or the one after. But I kept the tab. Then one Wednesday, I walked past the hall where they met. I stopped outside and listened through the door. Someone was laughing, not loudly, not for attention, just open. The next week, I went in. They didn't ask why. I came. They didn't ask where I'd been. It was just another chair filled. Another voice added to the circle. We read poems. We told stories. Some real, some imagined. No one cared which were which. There was a woman named Lena. She wore velvet and always had something baked in her bag. She offered me a shortbread cookie one night and said, "You have a kind face. Been through a storm? Maybe, but still standing." I didn't say anything, just took the cookie and smiled. The flat began to feel like mine. The hallway creaks no longer startled me. The kettle's whistle became a sound I looked forward to. I bought a plant, a small one. It drooped the first week, then came back stronger. I named it Mercy. I never used to name things. I kept writing in the notebook, though the entries changed. No longer observations of pain, but fragments of stillness. A line of a poem I remembered. The name of a bird I learned from a neighbor. A grocery list that didn't include anyone else's preferences. One day, got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address. It was from my grandson. It said, "Hi, I don't know why you left, but I hope you're safe. I miss you. I remember when you used to make me peanut butter toast and how you always cut it in triangles. No one does that here. If you ever want to write back, you can." I won't tell them. He had signed it with a drawing. A little heart half-shaded in pencil. I held that letter for a long time. I didn't reply, but I placed it in my notebook. Folded carefully between two pages, like something sacred. I lit a candle that night. For the first time in years, sat by the window and let the golden light of the setting sun meet the small flame. And I whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the moment. The quiet that no longer felt like absence. This was my new life. Not loud, not grand, but real. And mine. It had been 3 months since I left. The calls had stopped. The messages dried up. Their digital mourning had settled into silence, and the world they lived in no longer brushed against mine. That in itself felt like peace, until the envelope came. It was left in my mailbox one late afternoon, resting against a catalog and a grocery store flyer. My name written in neat, slanted handwriting. No return address. I carried it upstairs like it was fragile. Inside was a single page. A letter from my daughter. She wrote, "I don't know if this will reach you. I'm not sure where you are, and I understand if you don't want to be found. But I wanted to say something, even if it's too late. I think we forgot how to love you the way you needed. Maybe we never knew. Maybe we didn't try hard enough to know. We thought you'd always be there, holding things together, even when none of us noticed your hands were shaking. I didn't stand up for you when I should have. I watched others shrink you. I shrunk you. Sorry, if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I read it twice, then set it gently on the table beside my tea. My hands didn't tremble. My chest didn't heave. I just sat there, letting the words settle around me like dust. The next day, I walked down to the post office and bought a plain envelope. I didn't write back, but I held the blank paper in my hands for a while, just to see if my heart stirred. It didn't, not out of spite. Just because I had nothing left to explain. That weekend, I walked to the storytelling group like I always did. The room was warmer than usual, filled with the quiet hum of people who had learned to listen without rushing. We read short pieces and passed around mugs of tea that tasted of cinnamon and something floral I couldn't name. At the end of the session, Lena stopped me by the door. "Someone asked about you the other day," she said. "A younger woman, didn't leave a name. Wanted to know if we'd seen you. I didn't say anything. Figured if you wanted to be found, you would be." I thanked her. She squeezed my hand. The next day it happened. I was coming back from the market, small bag of plums in one hand, the key to my flat in the other, when I saw him, my son, standing on the sidewalk across the street, looking directly at me. He didn't wave, didn't shout. Stood there. Still. He crossed the road slowly, like he wasn't sure what I would do. He stopped 2 feet away. His face looked older. His face looked older, more tired. "Less certain. Hi," he said. I nodded once. "I'm not here to drag you back," he said. I wanted to see you in person. Once I waited. He looked at the bag in my hand. "You're eating plums again," he said, like it meant something. "You hated them," I said quietly. "Even as a kid." He smiled a little. "Still do?" We stood in silence for a while. It's just two people with a long road between them and nowhere to sit down. "I'm sorry," he said. It came out small. Honest, maybe. "I didn't know any more. We didn't mean to push you out. We just didn't know how to let you in." I looked at him then. Really looked. He wasn't the boy who used to hold my hand in the grocery store. He wasn't the man I had kept forgiving out of muscle memory. It was someone who had been taught to forget me. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You let me go?" He nodded. Swallowed. "I miss you," he said. I believed him, but I didn't move. He looked around at the neighborhood, then back at me. "You look lighter." "I am," I said. He blinked like that stung, but nodded anyway. "Do you want me to leave?" "Yes." He waited, as if maybe I would change my mind. As if maybe I'd fold the moment back in like I used to. I didn't. He looked down once, then stepped back. "Okay," he turned. Before he walked away, I said, "I got your son's letter." He turned around. "Hopeful, tell him I remember the triangle toast." He smiled. I will, and then he left. I stood on the sidewalk until he was gone from view. Then I climbed the stairs, unlocked my door, and set the plums on the counter. I didn't cry. Instead, I boiled water, sat by the window, let the golden light hit the glass just so. I lit a candle. This time, not to mourn, but to bless the quiet that stayed. I never went back. Not for a birthday. Not for the holidays. Not even after my grandson's quiet letter or my son's apology on the sidewalk. I think they expected time to wear me down, to soften the edges of what had been done. But time, I've learned, doesn't soften what's been understood. It only helps you carry it better. And I understood now. I was never the problem. I was simply the one who stayed too long in a house that had already stopped being a home. In this small, sunlit flat, I began to mark time differently. Not by the days I was needed, but by the days I felt peace. The plant I had named Mercy grew taller than I expected. I had to repot it, and the woman at the flower shop taught me how. She didn't ask my name, just showed me gently. Like care doesn't need explanation. I stopped keeping my phone charged. Eventually, I gave it up altogether. I got a small landline, the kind with no screen, no messages, no distractions. Only a voice when someone called. Most days, it never rang. I liked that. I picked up a small job at the library shelving, returned books. Just 4 hours a week, enough to give my days a rhythm. The other volunteers were kind, curious in soft ways, not the digging kind. We spoke about novels and weather and tea, never families. That silence felt like respect. One morning, as I was walking home with a paper bag full of ripe pears, it occurred to me that no one here knew who I had once been. Not the woman who was tolerated in someone else's home. Not the mother with hands always reaching and a voice always too soft to be heard. Here, I was just myself. An older woman with silver hair and a quiet walk. And that was enough. I still had the letter from my grandson. I read it once a month, always in the same chair, always slowly. It was the only connection I kept. A thread, not a rope. A memory, not a bond. I didn't send a reply, but I lit a candle every time I read it. A silent blessing that he'd grow into someone who knew how to stay kind, even when the world told him not to. Sometimes I walked down streets I hadn't seen before, found new bakeries, new parks. I started carrying a small sketch pad even though I'd never been an artist. I didn't draw well, but I drew anyway. Little shapes, cups, windows, shoes left on doorsteps. I think I was sketching evidence that I existed even in the smallest ways. I never stopped writing. The notebook grew full. I started another. They became less about pain and more about noticing. The way light moved across my floor in the evening. The way the radio host laughed too hard at his own jokes. The way a child once looked up at me on the bus and smiled like she knew me. Maybe she did. Not as someone she'd met, but as someone she might one day become. I kept going to the storytelling group. Eventually, I shared a piece. It wasn't about them, not directly. Just a story about a woman who walked into the quiet and stayed there long enough to hear her own voice. After I read it, no one clapped. They just nodded. It's a slow, reverent silence. That felt better than applause. Lena gave me a peach tart wrapped in wax paper that night. Told me I was brave. I said, no, just finally done being afraid. And it was true. I had spent too many years folding myself down into shapes that made other people comfortable, smiling through dismissals, staying quiet in rooms where I should have stood, carrying the weight of love that was never offered back. Now, I carried only what belonged to me, and I had learned that peace isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with celebration or grand gestures. It comes quietly, through routines, through dignity, through boundaries drawn not in anger, but in grace. I never told my family where I was. I didn't need to. They had all the tools to find me. What they lacked was permission. I had taken that back. Some days, saw women on the street who looked like the version of me I used to be hesitant, watching, waiting to be welcomed. I wanted to stop and tell them, it's okay to leave the room before they vote on who you are. It's okay to reclaim your own name. But I didn't. I just smiled and kept walking. Because the thing about surviving is this. Once you learn how to stop asking for a place in someone else's story, you begin writing your own. And mine had finally begun. One morning, I tore a page from my notebook, wrote 6 words. I do not wait anymore. I folded it into a square. Walked to the shore where the sea met the sky and placed it inside an old glass bottle I'd found at the market. Then I watched it float away. Not for drama, not for symbolism. Just for closure, just because I could, and that, I suppose, is how the story ends, not with revenge, not with return, just with one woman. Sitting quietly in the life she made for herself, and knowing, for the first time in decades, she belongs entirely to herself. The end.